The galaxy had always seen humans as the weakest species, primitive, fragile, and unworthy of respect. Across countless star systems, alien empires looked down on Earth as a backwater world, barely worth a glance. When the first official contact happened, the verdict was unanimous. Humans were nothing more than easy targets. But none of them knew the truth. None of them saw what simmered beneath humanity's surface. Earth was small, sure, but it was hardened by centuries of struggle. Our wars, our survival on a harsh planet, had forged a species that refused to break. The arrogant fleets from the Drakari Dominion thought they were about to claim another easy victory. Their ships, gleaming with advanced weaponry and thousands of years of conquest, arrived like vultures. They expected Earth to surrender without a fight. Instead, Earth's first warship, the Resolute, emerged from the depths of our space dock, an intimidating symbol of human tenacity and ingenuity. Unlike the sleek, graceful alien designs, the Resolute was a steel beast, bulky but built for raw power and resilience. It was humanity's first answer to the mocking sneers broadcast across the void. And it would be their last. When the Drakari fleet opened fire, their beams sliced through empty space, only to meet the Resolute's thick deflector shields. Alien missiles exploded harmlessly against layers of reinforced armor. The humans' counters struck back with brutal efficiency, the warship's weapons cutting through the enemy fleet like a knife through water. Alien commanders shouted orders in disbelief as their pride shattered with every ship lost. The battle was chaos, screams of anger and surprise echoing through the void. No one expected a single human warship to withstand such an assault, let alone destroy half the fleet. The Resolute wasn't just a ship, it was a statement. Humanity had arrived, and they weren't just survivors. They were warriors. But beneath the victory, there was a warning. The galaxy's powers would never forget this day. They would never underestimate humans again. Because from the ashes of their shattered fleet, a new era was born, a time when humanity would fight not just for survival, but for dominance. The Drakari commanders hadn't just lost ships, they'd lost their arrogance, and that cut deeper than any weapon. As their battered remnants retreated, the message sent back to their homeworld was clear. Humans were no longer prey. They were a storm rising, and storms weren't easily stopped. Back on Earth, the news of the Resolute's triumph spread like wildfire. For the first time, humanity looked up at the stars, not with fear, but with fierce pride. The warship wasn't just a machine. It was a symbol of everything humans had fought for: survival, defiance, and the unwillingness to be crushed. Civilians, soldiers, even politicians who had once doubted the worth of interstellar defense now cheered with a newfound hope. But in the shadow of celebration, the leaders knew this was just the beginning. The Drakari wouldn't take their defeat lightly. They were a proud, ruthless species, and revenge would be swift and merciless. Intelligence reports warned that the Dominion was already assembling a larger fleet, more terrifying than anything Earth had ever seen. Their strategy was clear: crush humanity before it could grow stronger, before the rest of the galaxy learned that Earth was no longer weak. Inside the command center of the Resolute, Captain Mira Alaric studied the incoming data with a tight jaw. She wasn't one for celebrations. This victory had come at a cost. Half the warship's systems had taken hits, and many of her crew were wounded. But what worried her most was the realization that this war wasn't about Earth anymore. It was about survival on a galactic scale. "Captain, new intelligence," her communications officer said, voice steady but tense. "Drakari reinforcements are approaching, 5 times the size of the original fleet." Mira's eyes darkened. "Then we prepare to fight 5 times harder." Around her, the crew moved with practiced efficiency, repairing systems, readying weapons, and training for the inevitable next encounter. There was no illusion of mercy from the enemy. The Drakari had underestimated humans once. They wouldn't make that mistake twice. But amid the growing tension, there was something else. A quiet determination that had nothing to do with technology or firepower. It was a hunger for respect, for survival, and for proving to the universe that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The Resolute wasn't just a warship, it was a promise that when the next battle came, humanity wouldn't just survive, they would shatter every expectation. The Drakari reinforcements arrived faster than anyone expected. The Resolute's scanners picked up the massive fleet appearing on the horizon, hundreds of ships, their dark hulls blotting out the stars like a shadow of doom. The sheer size of it was terrifying, but the humans aboard the warship felt a fire burning hotter than fear. Captain Mira Alaric stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the console as she watched the enemy approach. Her voice was calm, but filled with steel. This is the moment they thought would break us. It won't. Prepare all weapons, shields to maximum. We fight for Earth, for every soul depending on us. The crew responded with fierce determination. Engineers worked to stabilize damaged systems, gunners loaded plasma cannons, and tacticians plotted maneuvers that could outwit the superior numbers. Every person on that ship knew the stakes. Losing this battle would mean Earth's destruction or worse, subjugation. As the enemy opened fire, beams of deadly energy screamed through space, lighting up the void with explosions. The Resolute's shields flared, absorbing the punishment. But this time, the attacks were more precise, more brutal. The Drakari had learned, adapting to human tactics, exploiting every weakness they could find. Still, humanity fought back harder than ever. The Resolute's massive railguns fired with thunderous impact, tearing into alien cruisers, shattering hulls, and sending wreckage spinning into the dark. But even as they scored kills, it became clear this wouldn't be a quick victory. Minutes stretched into hours as the battle raged on. The Resolute danced through a deadly storm of missiles and energy blasts, each move a desperate bid for survival. Mira's voice never wavered, giving orders, encouraging her crew, reminding them what was at stake. "Hold your ground," she said. "Remember who we are." Despite the overwhelming odds, something strange began to happen. The Drakari fleet's confidence wavered. Their attacks grew disorganized, their formations breaking under relentless human fire. The Resolute was no longer just a target. It had become a legend in the making. But victory wasn't free. The ship's hull was scarred, systems failing one by one. The crew fought exhaustion, pain, and fear. Mira's eyes burned with a mix of anger and pride as she realized the truth. This was more than a battle. It was a test of humanity's soul. And in the cold depths of space, the warship shattered the alien fleet, not just with weapons, but with the unbreakable spirit of a species they once called weak. The silence after the battle was heavy, but it wasn't peace. The Resolute floated among the wreckage of the shattered Drakari fleet, scars running deep across its hull. The stars around them seemed colder, distant, as if the galaxy itself held its breath. Captain Mira Alaric stood alone on the observation deck, staring into the void where enemy ships once swarmed. The victory had been hard fought, but the cost was clear. Nearly a third of her crew had been lost or injured, and the ship's critical systems were barely holding together. Every corridor still smelled of burnt circuits and gunpowder. Yet, despite everything, the crew's spirits remained unbroken. If anything, the battle had only forged them stronger. Back on Earth, the news of the Resolute's triumph sparked a wave of mixed emotions. The public cheered, of course, but the government leaders were already preparing for the next inevitable conflict. They knew the Drakari would return, angrier and more determined than ever. The galaxy was watching now, and Earth was no longer an isolated planet. It was a player in a brutal game where weakness meant extinction. Mira's thoughts were interrupted by a message crackling over the comms. The voice was calm but urgent. "Captain, incoming transmission from Drakari Command. They want to negotiate." The entire bridge froze. No one expected mercy, only more bloodshed. Mira exchanged a glance with her first officer. Was this a trap? A sign of weakness? Or something else? She tapped the console and accepted the transmission. A holographic figure flickered to life, a high-ranking Drakari general with a stern expression. His words were blunt. "You have shattered our fleet and our pride. This war can only end one way, Captain. Surrender Earth, and we may spare your people." Mira's eyes narrowed. The offer was poison wrapped in silk. Surrender meant slavery, erasing everything humanity had fought for. "No," she said quietly, but with absolute certainty. "We will never surrender. If you come again, we will be waiting." The general's image flickered, then vanished. The message was clear. The war was far from over. Mira looked around the bridge, meeting the eyes of her weary crew. "Prepare for what's next," she said. "They thought we were weak, but we've just begun to show them what humans are made of. And somewhere in the cold depths of space, a warship, battered but unbowed, carried the fire of a species that refused to be broken." The weeks following the battle were a whirlwind of repair, preparation, and grim determination. The Resolute was patched up as best as possible, but deep beneath the surface, Captain Mira Alaric knew the real work was just beginning. The Drakari weren't backing down, and neither would humanity. Inside the warship's cramped briefing room, Mira stood before her officers, the tension palpable. The room hummed with the weight of their shared reality. This was no longer a simple defense. It was an all-out war for humanity's place in the stars. "Our victory was a message, but it also made us a target," Mira said, voice steady but firm. "The Drakari will come back with more ships, deadlier weapons. We can't just react, we have to strike first and strike smart." Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Rafe, nodded grimly. "We've identified several key Drakari supply lines and shipyards in the neighboring systems. Disrupting them could slow their reinforcements." Mira's eyes lit up with resolve. "Exactly. We hit them where it hurts. We take the fight to them before they reach Earth's doorstep." The plan was risky, but it was humanity's best chance. The Resolute would lead a surprise assault deep into enemy territory, targeting infrastructure critical to the Drakari war effort. It was dangerous, almost suicidal, but the alternative was waiting to be crushed. As the warship made its way through the dark expanse, the crew worked tirelessly, training harder than ever. Bonds formed between soldiers, engineers, and pilots, all united by a fierce determination to prove the galaxy wrong. Captain Mira often walked the decks late at night, watching the stars outside the portholes. She thought about Earth, her home, her family, the countless people depending on them. It was a responsibility heavier than any weapon. When the Resolute finally dropped out of warp near the Drakari system, a tense silence filled the bridge. They were deep behind enemy lines, surrounded by hostile forces. Every sensor beep, every blip on the screen was a reminder of the danger. "Prepare for attack," Mira commanded. "Remember, we fight not just for survival, but for respect, for the future of humanity." The warship surged forward, weapons ready, engines burning bright. The battle ahead would test everything they had learned, and everything they were willing to sacrifice. The humans who had once been mocked as weak were now the hunters, and the galaxy would soon learn that underestimating humanity was the deadliest mistake of all. The Resolute sliced through the Drakari system like a knife through silk, silent and deadly. The crew's nerves were tight as they closed in on their first target, a massive shipyard where the Dominion built their war machines. The facility was heavily guarded, protected by automated defenses and patrol fleets that outnumbered the Resolute by nearly 3 to 1. But the humans were prepared. Captain Mira paced the bridge, eyes sharp. Focus on disabling their shipyard's power grid first. Without energy, their defenses will crumble. The tactical officers coordinated a precise assault, deploying stealth drones and electronic countermeasures. Explosions erupted in the distance, lights flickering on the massive shipyard as systems failed one by one. The Resolute fired salvo after salvo of devastating plasma rounds, carving through defense turrets and hangars with surgical precision. The Drakari responded fiercely, sending squadrons of fighters to intercept. The bridge erupted in controlled chaos as pilots engaged in dogfights, their voices tense but unyielding. Fighter Wing Alpha reporting hostile interception. Crackled over comms. Alpha, hold formation. Cover our flanks. Mira ordered. We can't lose momentum. Despite being outnumbered, human pilots showed unmatched skill and grit. They maneuvered through asteroid fields and debris, using every advantage to outwit the enemy. One by one, Drakari fighters exploded into fiery wrecks. As the battle raged on, the shipyard's defenses faltered, its massive cranes and assembly lines reduced to molten scrap. The Resolute's crew felt a surge of hope. They were striking a blow that would slow the Dominion's war machine. But then, a new threat emerged. Sensors detected a colossal Drakari dreadnought warship warping in, the flagship of the fleet, a behemoth armed with weapons capable of obliterating the Resolute in seconds. Mira's heart pounded. All hands, prepare for heavy assault. This is the moment they've been waiting for. The dreadnought's first volley slammed into the Resolute, shaking the ship violently. Systems flickered and alarms blared as the crew scrambled to contain the damage. Return fire. Target their weapon arrays. Mira commanded. The Resolute unleashed everything it had, plasma beams and railguns blazing. The dreadnought's massive shields shimmered, but began to crack under the sustained assault. In the heat of battle, Mira knew one thing for certain. This fight would decide more than the fate of a shipyard. It would determine whether humanity could truly stand against a galaxy that had always seen them as weak. The dreadnought thundered across space, its massive form blocking out the stars as it bore down on the Resolute. Every blast it fired sent shockwaves through the smaller warship, ripping apart sections of the hull and throwing the crew into chaos. The bridge shook violently, consoles sparking and alarms screaming. Yet Captain Mira refused to back down. Keep firing on their weapon systems. We take those down, or we're done for. She shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos like steel. The tactical team worked frantically, targeting the dreadnought's turret arrays with precision strikes. The glowing weapons flickered and exploded one by one. Still, the enemy's power was overwhelming. The Resolute's shields were weakening fast, and critical systems were failing. Suddenly, an idea sparked in Mira's mind, a desperate gamble. Divert all remaining power to the forward railgun. Charge it for a full salvo. She ordered. The crew sprang into action, rerouting power and stabilizing the weapon. The railgun, a colossal cannon built to punch through enemy armor, hummed with energy. Every eye on the bridge was fixed on the targeting system. Mira gritted her teeth. Fire on my mark! 3, 2, 1, fire! The railgun unleashed a massive projectile, a glowing spear of energy that tore through the darkness. It slammed into the dreadnought's hull with a deafening explosion, piercing the shields and causing a chain reaction inside the enemy ship. Fire and smoke erupted as the dreadnought shuddered violently. For a moment, silence fell. Then the dreadnought's systems began to fail, its weapons powering down. The massive ship, once a symbol of unstoppable force, started drifting. Disabled. The crew erupted in cheers, exhausted but victorious. Mira allowed herself a brief smile, knowing this was a turning point. But victory was bittersweet. The Resolute was badly damaged, and they were deep in enemy space, surrounded by dangers still unknown. Prepare for immediate retreat. Mira said, her tone steady. "We've made our mark. Now we survive to fight another day." As the warship limped away from the burning wreckage, Mira looked out at the vast galaxy and knew one thing for sure. Humanity had shattered the myth of weakness. But the war was far from over, and the galaxy would never forget the day the Resolute shattered an empire. The Resolute limped through the star-streaked void, its hull battered, but its spirit unbroken. The escape from the Drakari system was tense. Every sensor sweep scanned for pursuers, every hand on deck ready for the fight that could come at any moment. Captain Mira Alaric stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead, but her mind was already racing with what came next. Earth was safe, for now. But the battle had changed everything. No longer was humanity a quiet backwater planet. They had become a force to be reckoned with, a thorn in the side of a ruthless empire. The galaxy would remember the Resolute and its crew as the spark that ignited a war no one wanted, but everyone would fight. Back home, the world watched the warships return with a mix of relief and pride. New ships were being built, new recruits trained, and alliances forged. The message was clear: humans would not be prey. They would be hunters. But in the quiet moments, Mira understood the true cost of their defiance. The crew who survived carried scars deeper than any wound, a weight of loss and responsibility. The galaxy was vast, and the enemies many. This victory was just the beginning of a longer, darker war. As the Resolute entered Earth's orbit, Mira addressed her weary crew. "We proved them wrong. We showed them that humans are not weak. But this is just the start. The galaxy will test us again and again. We have to be ready." Her words settled over them like a promise and a warning. The warship had shattered their fleet, but the fight for humanity's place in the stars was far from over. The day they thought humans were weak became the day the galaxy learned to fear us. And the Resolute sailed on, carrying the fire of a species that would never be broken.